This week's episode of the Cloudcast is brought to you by Intel Cloud for All, driving the creation of thousands of clouds.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast, coming to you live from our massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Tonight we are excited to talk to one of our really all-time favorite guests, and by that, Aaron and I both are big fans, but you guys are big fans as well. So Mark Imbriaco, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Brian. It's good to be back.
And I guess as far as backstories go, you came on, boy, it's probably been almost a year or so now, maybe a little bit longer. And for a very long time, we were talking about GitHub. You were running operations at GitHub, and for a very, very long time, you were the most popular show we'd ever had. So bad news, you've been overtaken. There was a show, I think, and we're not exactly sure how it happened. One of our shows had a guest from Europe, Ivan Pepelnik, and Ivan is a fantastic marketer, and he's overtaken you. So we'll have to do well tonight and get the numbers back up for you. So how you been, man? It's been a little while. You were at GitHub, but you've shifted gears a little bit since then.
Yeah, things have definitely changed for me. So I left GitHub back. I think the last time we talked was shortly before I left GitHub. In fact, I think I left about a month after we talked, and I went to DigitalOcean, where I ran technical operations for almost a year. So from the sort of end of the first quarter of last year through the end of the year, I was working at DigitalOcean, helping to build out the SRE team and technical operations, and just kind of work at an amazing company that's scaling and growing like crazy. DigitalOcean is, for those who don't know, a public cloud who's really sort of focused on developer experience and simplicity, and they're killing it.
Right.
But around the end of the year, I had a really good opportunity to sort of take a step back and look at a kind of a higher level about the arc of my career and what I wanted to do. And you know, it's kind of an embarrassment of riches situation where you have the ability to finally take a chance and do something you've wanted to do for a long time. So I decided to actually, over the holidays, I decided to leave DigitalOcean and start my own company.
Very cool.
Yeah, so my good friend Kevin Smith and I, both here in the Durham area, decided to leave our jobs. We raised some funding and started a company called Operable, where we are working on building some tools to help ops people like me collaborate to solve problems better together. Nice.
And obviously, we always love, I mean, you're local. We get to run into you at the local, DevOps meetup events and other things. But, one of our favorite things is always when we have people that have sort of lived and breathed stuff and then took the things that they learned and in a lot of cases, the tools they wish they had built or the platforms they wish they had built and went and turned those into commercial offerings. So it's very cool that you're finally doing that. So before we jump into some stuff, because we're not going to talk a lot about Operable, you guys are still a little ways out from getting things into the marketplace. We'll come back and dig into that. I want to talk a little bit about just kind of some of the experiences at DigitalOcean, not so much to give away what those guys do, but just give people a sense of, in the pace of public cloud and the pace of these big, large scale clouds, like what's a week in the life or a month in the life of the SREs look like? And I know you were building out helping them roll out some new data centers, so it's a little exaggerated, but give folks a sense of what that's like.
Yeah, it was, the pace is just incredible. The company, the time that I was there for, I guess I was there for 9 or 10 months before I decided to do my own thing. I think we grew the number of servers that we had by something like 2.5 or 3x. We moved up the ranks of the Netcraft survey to become the second or third largest hosting provider on Earth. At this point, I think they're number 2 right behind Amazon, and we were 2 or 3 when I left. So the growth was just phenomenal. A lot of the work we were doing was just sort of foundational. It was kind of dealing with and continuing to deal with the scale, right? When you grow that fast, you create a lot of problems, kind of organizationally, and not organizationally in necessarily a bad way, just strain. When you're growing that quickly, you need to add systems, you need to build systems, you need to get practiced at rolling out data centers faster. You need to change the way you do things as you hit different inflection points along the scaling curve. So a lot of the time that I was there, we were really focused on that. I think at this point they've sort of transitioned past that to an extent and have a lot of the fundamental process around, for example, setting up a new data center. And I can't take credit for that. That work was really starting as I was leaving. The team there did a phenomenal job sort of carrying that on.
Yeah.
Those guys have really transitioned into product development and are really focused on rolling out new features now.
Yeah, no, they're cranking along, and I think they're probably their one I don't want to call it a weakness, but their one area that they can probably get a lot better at is like you said, marketing. If people don't know who DigitalOcean is, great experience, super easy to get a lot of very cool technology up and running really easily. So. You've been, the last time we talked to you, I mean, you've been in a number of places. I mean, you've been at Living Social, which when that whole coupon craze was going on, you were there. You were at GitHub when it was going like crazy. It's still growing like crazy. How much, when those places are growing so fast, they bring in folks like you who've got a bunch of experience. Obviously, there's a bunch of other people. Like, how much do you have to go in and sort of forget what you did in a previous job, and how much do you sort of have to go, okay, there's a natural sort of progression in terms of like when we put certain aspects of the system in versus when we have enough money to do that, or I mean, are you starting to see some patterns where you can kind of go, hey, when there's this much pace of change, you're going to do this at this time and this at another time?
Yeah, I think, the value of experience is not becoming less over time, right? The value of people that have experience, that have sort of been there and done that, and who have done a lot of things and seen a lot of environments and worked through lots of problems, that is a tremendously valuable skill. And I was really fortunate to both have worked at a bunch of places and gained a bunch of that experience myself, but also to have worked with other people that had differing experiences. So, I think the way that all those things come together from a bunch of different people, I think if you sort of push that in to the back burner and didn't want to say, well, we did it this way at this other place, like if you shy away from that, if you neglect to bring forth the experience that you've won, oftentimes through kind of hardship and failure and downtime and outages, if you don't bring that knowledge in with you, you're really doing a disservice to your organization. So I think it's tremendously valuable. Yeah. At the same time, you definitely have to recognize that every situation is very, very different. When you're at a different scale of a company, for example, maybe you're Living Social and you're trying to optimize cash flow or cost of revenue or data center spend, or maybe you're GitHub and you're just growing so fast you're trying to keep up and you're willing to spend more money on infrastructure to stay ahead of the curve and to make things fast. Every situation is really different, and you sort of have to look at it. But if you neglect the kind of the lessons from the past, you're really kind of letting everybody down. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I know we've just little things like you introduced us all to HughBot and the stuff that you guys had built over there, and I know Aaron and I have sort of shared that concept with a lot of people, and so it's cool to see when you can take even regular tools that the web scale guys are doing, and we're starting to see them get used even in sort of smaller operations and stuff. So that stuff is also very cool, and obviously it all gets shared out in the public now, which is very, very cool. So how much has changed? I mean, obviously you're now looking at an opportunity to build some things that hopefully help people, kind of put into commercial software, kind of the experience that you have. What's been the biggest changes that you've seen over the last, say, 18 months, whether it's around operations or DevOps or just things that you're like, that needs to be commonplace and that needs to be best practice, and I need to figure out a way to do that better.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, slightly more broadly, I think that one of the biggest things that I've seen over the last 18 months is people are sort of the knowledge around, I guess, what folks are calling cloud native applications these days, this kind of service-based architecture, this kind of shared nothing approach, these smaller units of application infrastructure and code. Those ideas are finally starting to get out there, and the platforms to empower that kind of architecture are starting to become more prevalent. I was doing this back in 2009, 2010 at Heroku, and the ideas of platform as a service took a long time, took frankly longer than I expected to sort of start to get to critical mass. But I think the worm has definitely turned there, and we are seeing tremendous adoption of things like Cloud Foundry. We are seeing huge uptake in things like Kubernetes and Mesos. Amazon has jumped on board. We've got Docker just completely out of control growth. I think those ideas and sort of the containerized smaller app deployment, developer-friendly deployment pipelines, all those things have really started to take hold much more broadly than they were even 18 months, 2 years ago, and I don't see that slowing down at all.
Yeah. Now, you've never been afraid to be sort of opinionated and outwardly opinionated. What's your take? You talked a little about Cloud Foundry. Cloud Foundry is a lot of times the term is opinionated. I tend to call it structured, but it's kind of you get the entire platform, if you will, and then you've got various people that are building variations on Kubernetes plus Docker plus maybe some stuff from HashiCorp or CoreOS or what's your take on those two sort of approaches? I mean, is it horses for courses? It depends on your organization and what you can do, or do you feel like one of them has a much better chance to survive than the other?
I think that market is plenty big enough that there's room for lots of players here. I do think to an extent it's kind of horses for courses. I think it really depends on what you're trying to optimize for, on what the shape of your applications look like, on what your methodology is, and in the case of things like Cloud Foundry, on sort of what your organization is ready for, what the sort of cultural mores are to an extent, right? Because I think opinionated is a reasonable word for Cloud Foundry, and it's not a bad thing. I think being opinionated has been a huge success factor for a lot of places. Basecamp, where I was, Heroku, 37 Signals, all those places were very opinionated, and they weren't afraid to sort of say, we have this idea about how we think these things ought to work, and this is how we're going to build our applications. I think Cloud Foundry is doing much the same thing. And I think it's going to work for them. I think that having some structure there, having some opinions, providing a little bit more predictability and consistency across how things are built and deployed platform-wide gives people in operations or other groups within the company a lot more comfort in the solution as a whole, right? When they can have some predictability about how things work, they can know what the shape of an application is. Now, things like Mesos, completely different situation to an extent. Mesos is much more about building your application to as a distributed system in a way that is a little more deeply coupled typically, right? So you've got these parts that communicate in ways that maybe just aren't REST calls. Maybe there's, protocol buffers. Maybe they need to do coordination. Maybe they need some distributed systems primitives and consensus and leader election and those sorts of things that Mesos can provide. And Mesos is also really focused on efficiency of hardware and physical resources in a way that's just not as important to Cloud Foundry. Cloud Foundry is really focused on what's the experience to get this application from development to production in a stable, supportable way as quickly as possible. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of difference between the two. I think Kubernetes is interestingly somewhere kind of in the middle between the two. I think it's still Kubernetes is nowhere near opinionated like Cloud Foundry is, and it's also much younger. But I think there's room for all of those things. And I also think to an extent it depends on the size of the organization and what the organization needs. I think all three of the solutions are bad choices for companies that have a small number of apps, where small is probably a couple of dozen or less, right? If you have less than 30 apps, you should not be spending your time looking at Mesos, Kubernetes, or Cloud Foundry. You should be spending your time making your business work.
Right.
You don't have those problems at that scale that was what drove those applications and those platforms. And we see a lot of people run afoul of that, where they think, oh, I've got 5 or 6 applications. I really need this platform now. And the simple reality is, no, you don't. And I think we need to see the knowledge and the sort of discipline and understanding about when these solutions are appropriate to apply get filtered out more broadly.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it there's a little bit of obvious market kind of winner take all, which you expect from either kind of a community that's heavily invested or some of the vendors. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I think the big thing that I hear from a lot of companies is they're just sort of going like, how do I get there? When do I start to make changes? What are the right sort of changes to make versus what are the patterns I shouldn't follow? So yeah, I mean, I'd love to see. And the thing is, I don't know where that discussion necessarily happens. I don't know if it happens in the DevOps events. I don't know if it happens at something like Velocity. I don't know if it's going to start happening in the Cloud Foundry sort of summits. It feels, I don't, I wonder, like, do you see those discussions happening, other than like in the hallways, where they're kind of helping people not just talk about which technology to pick or choose, but, when to, like you said, go from I've got 10 or 20 apps and I really should just only focus on the business to, platform becomes a strategic asset for the business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that you see different approaches from the different projects. I don't think you're actually seeing the conversation happen at all right now, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But you're also seeing different approaches to how you market the projects from each of them. Cloud Foundry is a great example of this. This problem doesn't exist, as far as I can tell, with Cloud Foundry, because Cloud Foundry is, laser focused on the enterprise, where this is a problem for every company they market to.
Right.
Every company they market to has hundreds or thousands of applications to support in production. Every company they market to has hordes of developers who need to crank out applications faster and faster, and it's a strategic benefit to the business. So I don't think you see it to the same extent with Cloud Foundry as you might with Mesos and Kubernetes and some of the other trendier, I guess, open source projects.
Right.
I think Mesos, it's interesting. I think you see Mesos, you see a lot of excitement around Mesos and Kubernetes, largely from the sort of aspirational desires of people who see where they came from, right? Twitter, Airbnb, others have widely publicized use of Mesos. Kubernetes obviously spawned from Google. Those are aspirational companies for a lot of technology startups and a lot of the people that are doing development at these smaller startups. They see these patterns in use, and they go from I need to build these cloud native, smaller applications that are more loosely coupled, that federate, that fit together nicely. They go from that idea, which is good and is generally applicable in almost every case. It's a reasonable architectural pattern at any rate. They go from that to, oh my God, I need a platform. And oh my God, I really need to make really teeny tiny microservices, even before I have built the service in the first place. In fact, at Operable, we made the same mistake, and I ought to know better. We went down this path because I know that the ultimate end game for us is going to be service-based. It is going to be lots of coordinated, smaller services. And I mean, I'm 100% certain that that's where we get. But even me and the team that we have with tons of experience ran afoul of this problem. Fortunately, we were able to see it pretty quickly, but still, the idea that you should start with microservices, that there's a panacea for development, that monolithic apps are horrible in every case. All of these things are dangerous ideas that people need to temper their enthusiasm to an extent.
Right. You obviously are heavily involved in the DevOps community and a number of other communities. As you talked, I mean, you've obviously worked at some places that are pretty unique. In terms of, how well they've done. So hence you've got a bunch of experience and you've sort of seen how, probably the sort of prototypical DevOps looks like. How much do you see it? How much do you see other shops run, the way that you did that? I mean, do we see still ops as a very sort of segmented section and they're still trying to figure out just how to go fast? Or are you seeing the sort of, I don't know, definition of DevOps kind of actually out there in practice? Are you seeing it evolving quickly, or is it still, lots of learning and lots of cultural change that has to happen?
Yeah, I think that the answer is that there's still lots of cultural change that needs to happen. The ideas of DevOps, the core of DevOps is one of it's a focus on culture. It's a focus on collaboration. It's a focus on communication throughout the entire application lifecycle, from development through deployment, through production, through learning from failures in production and feeding back into development. I think the unfortunate truth right now is that to a large extent, the world and the community and the operations and development world has fixated on the dev half of DevOps to the detriment or to the neglect of the ops side. We've spent a tremendous amount of time over the last few years focused on how can we more quickly get applications from a developer laptop into production. And we call that ops. To me, that's not really ops. That's still focused on the dev side of DevOps. I don't see much action on the ops side of DevOps in terms of companies, in terms of community, in terms of conversation. When you think about ops as sort of the day-to-day production operations of an application that has been deployed, I think the biggest players that you see that are looking at that side at all are typically monitoring related companies. But if you think about the other side of the equation, maybe you say, well, there's companies like Chef and Puppet and these configuration management guys who are doing great. And I'd say that's true. They are doing great and they're doing really good work. But it's still, if you ask me, focused largely on the dev side and solving the problem of how do we more quickly get this code from developer laptop to production in a consistent, predictable way.
Right.
And that's a shame. We need to spend a lot more time focused on how do we manage these things once we get them into production? How do we live with them? How do we build the systems and processes and tools and culture and collaboration and all of these things to make our entire team successful and make our company more successful instead of just focusing on getting code shipped more quickly? And it's really kind of understandable how we ended up here. As soon as you sort of go from a bunch of people on the internet and Twitter talking about DevOps and culture to trying to sell it to the enterprise, you need a hook.
Right.
And the hook is we help you get your code into production faster.
Right.
Well, anybody
and every company that's ever sold to the enterprise, every one of them has gotten really good at going, here's my demo, here's how fast I can install something. That's day one. Doesn't that sound awesome? And people go, yes. And like the question I always have for people is I go, that's cool. And maybe day 2 isn't so bad. What does day 365 look like? Or day 1006 or something like that? Because that's when the system gets muckety and everyone kind of goes, ugh, yeah, I don't want to, we'll just figure it out from there.
Yeah. So what happens when you go from last year, our team deployed 5 applications and that was great. And suddenly we've got these new tools and these new processes and we deployed 50 applications this year. What does it look like to our team, to our culture, to our company, to our stress levels, for God's sake, when we have 55 applications in production or 500 applications in production? Have we made the fundamental changes to our structure, to the way that we collaborate, to the way that we communicate, to the way that we feedback learning to support that kind of environment? I think the answer almost universally is no.
Yeah. Let me ask you, it's kind of a philosophical question because there's always a lot of sessions at various meetups and stuff that talk about burnout and talk about empathy and talk about, being an SRE is a hard job, being on pager duty is a hard job and so forth. One of the things I always talk about is a lot of companies that have sold to the enterprise have sort of survived because they would go to the enterprise, they would say, look, this is what you need to run whatever system you want to run, whether you're selling networking equipment or you're selling databases or whatever. And you would go, if you really don't want to worry about not sleeping, about getting through Saturday nights and not getting called, just buy twice as much, right? Buy twice as much, buy redundancy, buy this. And even though your utilization is going to be 10, 15, 20%, you'll sleep at night. And we all know operations is most of the cost. It's not so much CapEx. And the enterprise gets away with that because that's not their business, right? Their business is building tractors or building automobiles or doing pharmaceuticals, and IT is a percentage of that. Like, is there a way to sort of deal with this sort of stress that goes on when things, when IT becomes part of the business? Because I feel like, salespeople get burned out, but they don't get burned out in the same way that I hear a lot of engineers talk about getting burned out.
Yeah, it's brutal. Our community has been hit hard in the past year or so. We've had suicides, we've had burnout, we've had people leaving the industry. It is not easy, and the support networks aren't in place to support it. And there's a lot of undiagnosed problems in the field, and that's not unique to operations, but it is sort of a kind of a high stress environment in a lot of situations. Right, and it doesn't really have to be. Again, I think it really comes back to you use the word empathy, and that's really important. I think it's also really important. Collaboration is sort of the ultimate end game from empathy, right? Everybody across the board needs to have skin in the game. Everybody needs to understand what impact these changes they're making to policy and procedure and scale of the production environment and number of applications deployed. You need to understand what the impact of those changes are. More broadly than, oh boy, we just got this application into production. And I think the only way we get there is for some people to get hurt.
Yeah.
in terms of outages, in terms of operations teams quitting in mass, in terms of really widely publicized security breaches or long-term outages or operational missteps. And those things, I think those things tend to be self-corrective to an extent. The sad thing is that people do get hurt in the process, and people do get burned out and overworked and treated poorly and fired when it's not their fault. The Symantec thing is one that infuriates me lately. That the executives have the gall to say that they had a bad day when they fired a bunch of people who followed the procedures or skipped the procedures that they put in place because they had to skip them in order to meet the demands that the business put on them, without sort of taking any looks at the environment that led people to make these decisions. People don't come to work saying, I'm going to do a bad job.
Right.
People come to work and they work around procedures and process, not because they want to do a bad job, but because they're under some pressure that the organization put on them to deliver in ways that the process doesn't support. And there's not enough focus on that. There's not enough organizational learning happening. There's not enough retrospection about successes and failures. There's plenty of finger pointing and hand waving and hand wringing when things go wrong, but there's not enough sort of preemptive look before you get to that point. And there's not enough focus on when projects succeed. Why did they succeed? Did we get lucky, or did we actually have a plan? I think there's just a ton of things that we need to do as an industry that we're really going to get burned if we're not careful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let me shift it off of that a little bit and get back a little bit to some of the technology. So, there's always the challenge of, go fast and security comes into play. Security probably should always come into play, but security has this funny tendency to, sometimes it's top of mind for people. It usually requires a big hack or a big outage or something. And then sometimes it kind of just, people forget about it because it's sort of situation normal. Do you think, now that we're sort of back in one of these phases where security feels like it's top of mind to people, whether it's because of Snowden stuff or it's because of an overseas hacking or something. Do you see security and the challenges of security potentially being a reason people start to go, hey, I can use this as a throttle for dealing with sort of the pace of this, because I got to get security right. Obviously, I want to automate it. I want to use certain baselines. I mean, do you see that being maybe one of the throttles that helps people say, I don't have to deploy nearly as fast, but I'm going to deploy more secure without, sort of not putting my foot on the brake? But I mean, do you see any balance in that helping this at all? Because security is back top of mind for people, or is that just a fad and it'll go away?
Well, I don't think security being top of mind is a fad. But I also don't think it's going to slow anybody down.
Yeah.
And I think the reasons for that are pretty clear to me. I think that there's a lot of enterprises, rightly so, that are sort of in this existential threat mode where they're concerned that they're being outcompeted by other people. Maybe there's a startup that's sort of disrupting their entire business. Maybe other companies are doing a better job of getting to market with new product and features. Whatever the reasons are, they vary widely. Companies can't afford to let their foot up off the throttle, so they have to do both. And they have to figure out smarter ways to approach those security problems. In a lot of ways, it's a very similar problem to the situation we face on the ops side, on the security side, in terms of how it's resourced versus the demands that are put on it. A lot of security startups are going to make a lot of money.
Yeah. It's there's an opportunity everywhere.
Exactly.
So, let me ask you a question. You've been in a bunch of shops, different shops that use different languages, different frameworks. From an ops perspective or a DevOps perspective, like, do you find any are more friendly or tend to be more successful? I mean, is it, does one language tend to translate better into success? And I don't want to turn this into a religious thing because that could go sideways quickly. But I mean, just in terms of what you're seeing, like, is Go looking more, I don't know, more helpful than, say, Ruby might have, or stuff written in Java, or is there a framework that's, you're like, boy, I wish more people would adopt this?
You know what? I think in large part, and this is probably going to be an unpopular position, but I think to a large extent it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think the percentage difference in your outcome based on your technology choice is probably single digits, and if it's not single digits, it's very low. It's in the teens. So choosing one technology over another, the chance that you're going to have a better outcome is fairly small. And when you balance that against maybe the risks you have to take on by adopting something that's newer or something that your team doesn't have expertise in, it just doesn't seem like a winning bet. That said, there can be. It's very situational, right? It depends on what you're building. You should use the right tool for the job. You shouldn't be afraid of new technologies. But I also think that the reality is, if your team is comfortable in one technology and they like that technology and they're good at implementing that technology, I don't think you're going to see another technology that's going to make a massive difference in their speed of development these days. Because I think that the sort of fundamental ideas that have made software development move faster over the past decade. A lot of ideas that came out of things like Rails and Django and these more dynamic frameworks, they exist across all the languages these days. There's analogs to the frameworks. There's analogs to those ideas. There's better ideas in some places, and there's different ideas and different takes. But the reality is that the speed at which you can execute development across the sort of almost any technology platform you choose, and again, there's exceptions, but I don't see it as a differentiator in most cases.
Okay. So it's more about sort of practices and process and like you said, collaboration than maybe it is a specific technology over another one.
Yeah, I mean, it's architecture, right? If the people that are designing the architecture for your systems are comfortable in a certain technology and they understand that technology intimately, that sounds like a pretty damn good bet to me to go with the technology that they know.
Yep. So I'm gonna wrap it up a little bit. We're getting to that point where people stop listening, their run's done, or they stop mowing the grass. But sort of one last question, and I said we weren't going to talk about operable, but in terms of if you're throwing ideas out there for people to think about, what they do now, about, what you're thinking about, what's some seeds to plant in people's mind that maybe we'll come back to in 6 months that you'll go, yeah, let's see how those little things blossomed.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think that, at a really high level, I think we're seeing lots of talk lately about machine learning and about automatic remediation and event-driven remediation and self-healing systems and all of these ideas. And they're all great, and they all help reduce the burden. And they all, again, this is going to be a fairly unpopular comment, but they all solve a very uninteresting problem. They solve the problem of I've built a system that's generating useless alerts, and I need a way to handle those useless alerts. The way to handle those useless alerts isn't to hook them up to shell scripts that fix the problem automatically. The way to solve those problems is more fundamental. Now, do I think that those tools don't have a place? Because absolutely not. Those tools are still super important, and they can buy you a lot of leverage, and they can relieve some burden on your team. But I think there needs to be a lot more focus on the human side of our systems, on the collaboration, on the way that we work together, on the way that we take the things that we've discovered as we've been working on problems and creating experiences and learn from them, and how we feed that knowledge back into the team and to the organization as a whole. So that's what we're really focused on. We're really focused on the human side, how we provide tools that don't replace people, but augment them, help them collaborate together. I mean, I think that's what it's all about for me. It's about collaboration. It's about building these adaptive human systems. Yeah.
No, excellent. Very cool. Well, listen, you're always out and about. Oh, I mean, nowadays your head's down, building and so forth, but what's, where might you be? Where are you going to be around? Or what's the best place for people to kind of, potentially reach out to you if they want to learn more about operable or just kind of the stuff that you've got a bunch of experience in?
Yeah, so I'm not sure when this episode's going to air, but I'll be in New York at Velocity New York in a couple of weeks. And you can always sort of find me on Twitter. I'm at Mark Imbriaco, and I'm sure that'll be in the show notes somewhere. You can also you can email me at mark@operable.io, and I'd love to chat with people about these ideas around sort of how we help teams collaborate better together.
Very cool. And folks, we do a lot of stuff with the folks at O'Reilly. If you need discount code for Velocity 20 Cloud, we'll get you 20% off of that. And we'll probably end up doing, if we can put something together, a giveaway for PaaSes if people are looking for that as well. So very cool. So Mark, we always love having you on the show. We love seeing you in person as well, although between the three of us, we're rarely all in the same place at the same time. So thank you for being on as always. Hopefully we'll have you back here when GA and launch and all that stuff takes place. Folks, thanks as always for listening. For Aaron, who him and I will both be out at AWS next week. So if you want to catch up to us, come find us somewhere. Thank you much for listening, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.